I think it's only fair that I join the first two speakers in thanking Bishop Yunan for such a very inspiring and powerful speech. And I found little to disagree with in what he said. In fact, I found nothing to disagree with, I would say. And I think he solved a lot of the problems that I thought I may have to address when he gave you some of the examples of what he has been actively involved in with Muslims and Arabs in the Middle East in the dialogue arena. And I often get asked what are the possibilities of Muslims joining a peaceful dialogue with followers of other religions, and especially where are the Muslim Luthers who will champion the Islamic Reformation that will produce tolerant Islam. So I was tempted to talk about this idea of the Islamic Luther. And when you look at it, you find most of the people who talk about where is the Islamic Luther, they are mostly columnists and pundits, and it's a debate in the popular press. In the academic literature, you are more likely to hear the question phrased differently: where are the Islamic Protestants? Or where is the Islamic Reformation? Though it's never explicitly stated, you get the impression that an Islamic Luther is necessary for Islamic Reformation, which will be necessary as a prelude to some kind of Islamic tolerance at the end of the day. Now, having listened to a few of this session in this conference, I'm not sure that this trajectory is so clear and straightforward, or that it is the most efficacious way for Muslims to follow to find a Luther as such. A few names have been thrown about Islamic Luther, and I can mention a few. Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, Osama bin Laden, Tariq Ramadan, Manji, and one of the most interesting Islamic Luthers actually is a woman, a black woman, an American black convert to Islam, who led the first mixed congregation prayer in New York about 2 years back, and caused a lot of uproar all over the place, and she's hailed as the Islamic Luther. You can't get better than that, right? Yes. And given the recent remarks by the Archbishop of Canterbury about the desire about what he said may be a advisable thing to do to have some Islamic law recognized and applied in British court, you wonder if he is also on the way of becoming one of the Islamic Luthers. But more seriously, I'd like to make comments on two important remarks that I hope the panel will address at some length. This idea of where are the Muslim initiatives for dialogue with the followers of other religions. Already the speech mentioned some of the efforts in the Holy Land. There are several other efforts that don't make the headlines. I'm sure you never heard about the effort of his group. It doesn't make the headline of the local news. But it is not the only one. Back in the early 1990s, the Iranian clerical establishment took an initiative of studying Christian theology at some considerable depth, and they have major Christian thinkers translated into Persian and Arabic. And after several years of study, they took a few initiatives to open conversation, first with the Eastern Orthodox Church for quite a couple of years, then with the Anglican Communion in London, and they also wanted to come to the United States. Actually, they even arrived in Washington. There's a Center of Christian and Muslim Relation Dialogue at Georgetown University, but their trip got caught up in the politics of immigration, and the debate never took place in the United States. But it is one of the early, and interestingly, coming from all places, the Islamic Republic of Iran to initiate a dialogue at a sustained intellectual level. And of course, since the 9/11 event, there have been several of these kind of effort. I can mention only very few. There's a Saudi-American dialogue, which has been going on, I think, now for about 4 years. There's also a dialogue taking place in Doha. There's several events surrounded about that. And more interestingly, there are one important trajectory of this Muslim initiative for dialogue is from Indonesia and Canada. This also has been lasting now for about 15 years. This was an initiative from the Indonesian government to train a whole crop of Muslim intellectuals at the famous Islamic Studies Institute at McGill University. That initiative, which is now in its second decade, had produced a whole cohort of new Muslim intellectuals who are dominating the public debate in Indonesia. And they are producing completely different public understanding of Islam that is particularly directed away from the unholy entanglement between religion and politics. There's a greater emphasis on society and individual religiosity. This initiative never made headlines, but the impact it has produced, particularly in Indonesia, is remarkable. Another kind of initiative that also doesn't make headlines, but is likely to have much more profound impact on Muslim societies is the embrace of the American university in Muslim societies. In the last 10 years, about a dozen or so American universities have been established, especially in the Arab Peninsula, where petrol money is large enough to take the expensive proposition of establishing an American university. This is a very interesting development because I think there has been the recognition that the American university is perhaps one of the most vital institutional force for social transformation. And I may add, the American success as it is. And in most recent years, and that is this year, this very university has joined the bandwagon. Northwestern University will open a campus in Qatar. And it is one of these trends that open a different kind of channel of dialogue between Muslims and the West generally. And the impact of this, I think, is likely to be far more profound for generations to come than most of the political speeches that are made all the time. The second important thing about Muslim dialogue with followers of other religions is the intellectual rethinking of the Islamic tradition. There is a long-standing debate going back to the 19th century about the reformulation of the self-understanding of the Islamic religion. In the early part of the 20th century, secular nationalism trumped that initial attempt. Until the 1970s, secular nationalism dominated the public sphere in most Muslim societies. And in many cases, the excesses of the secular nationalist effort were quite horrendous. And in a great sense, much of the recent upsurge and turmoil and religious revival movements in the Muslim world are reactions against the excesses of secular nationalism that dominated most of Muslim societies in the first half of the 20th century. Now, at the beginning of the 21st century, the debate about rethinking and reformulating the Islamic religion is back in full force. If you know the Islamic tradition, of course, you would know that theology is not the queen of the sciences. So the debate is not cast in theological terms as much as it is cast in legal terms. Law is the queen of the sciences of the Islamic tradition. And the current debate across Muslim lands, if you care to follow it, is underway in full force. I may mention that in the 19th century, there was the attempt to say the received intellectual heritage of Islam is outdated and it needs to be completely thrown overboard. And it was partly because this argument didn't win the day within the intellectual theological cycles that secular nationalism gained ascendancy. And throughout the whole debate about how to reformulate religious thought, now, the more recent debate is attempting to say secular liberalism or secular nationalism as such is not the solution. And that revisiting the received medieval formulations of the tradition offers much more promising trajectories for reformulating the Islamic self-understanding than the idea of throwing the whole tradition as a whole. So in the debate, I could give you one example of the trajectory of this debate was the idea from the medieval understanding of Islamic law about what is the intent of God when God gave law for humans to comply with. And here the striking idea is readily recognizable, right, in American constitutional law. What is the intent of the framers? Like, can you recapture the intent and then change the law to keep the intent as times and circumstances change? So in this line of Islamic legal debate in the contemporary times, for example, the idea of the intent of God when God gave law, from the medieval Islamic formulation, it was accepted that the intent is to preserve life, to preserve religion, to preserve property, to preserve family, and to preserve honor, or for some jurists, human intellect. And the interesting thing in the formulation is that these categories are formulated in the generic. It is not to preserve Muslim life, but to preserve life. It's not to preserve Muslim religion, but to preserve religion. It's not to preserve Muslim property, but property. This is the medieval formulation. And one of the trajectory in the debate is how to consider these ideas as Muslims rethink what it means to be Muslim in the 21st century and in relation to the other. I think I would like to stop here and then join the conversation. Thank you.